Welcome to Access Europe, the September meeting. It's a beautiful sunny day here in the UK. We've finally got summer after a miserable few months before now. Today, I'm going to be talking about my just released Database Analyzer Pro application and some other tools that I use as part of that, depending on whatever time we've got available. The web page for this particular session is AEU19, and the dedicated page for my Database Analyzer Pro tool is as written on the bottom of the screen there. Okay, this utility then, it analyzes, as it says there, a wide range of items in any Access database, whether it's ACCDB, ACCDE, DR file, MDB, MDE, without opening it directly. And it is able to provide detailed information about the structure and size of each database object. And that's where I started with this back in about February, with a much more cut down version of what this has eventually turned into. And it just grew and grew and grew. Since my initial version, which was a free application, I've added details about relationships, object dependencies, VBA references, code modules, code procedures, and database properties. And I'll show you all of those in a few minutes' time. And the main reason for doing this, and it's targeted really at experienced developers, that if you are considering taking on new work from clients, you can look at their applications, get an idea of what the priorities are for attention, decide whether or not that's likely to be worth your while, and provide the client with detailed documentation to indicate the reasons why you're going to cost the job at the price that you intend to do. For example, some of the things that you might be interested in is that tables with a large number of fields or a lot of complex data types may need restructuring. You might want to rewrite them to get rid of attached fields and multi-valued fields and so on. And similarly, if there's any tables that occupy a large disk space, that may indicate problems as well. Right, the main features. If you've already looked at the web page or tried the free evaluation version of the app, which is available there, you can view and analyze all database objects, the metadata behind them, and get the object sizes. You can look in detail at table data and the table design. And that's true for local or linked or system tables. You can also look at the fields and all the field properties. And for queries, you can look at all the properties and you can look at the query in any of the three views: design view, SQL view, or datasheet view. Similarly, with relationships, you can get detailed information about each relationship, referential integrity, and so on, and similar information for VBA references. You can also get a complete list of all VBA procedures and view the code with optional color coding as well. Next, you can look at all the object dependencies. Now, that's a process that in Access you can only do for one object at a time. With my application, you can look at all of the dependencies for all objects at the same time. Finally, you can look at all the database properties. And although there's more I could have added, I decided to stop at that point to see whether or not that would cover most people's needs or whether there's other things that people request, which I can look at in the future. And for each of the things above, there are inevitably a wide range of reports, and I will show you those as well later on. As I mentioned earlier, that is the main page for finding the information about that. Time to look at the app. And it starts off with a splash screen, and that's appearing over this PowerPoint slide here, but it would be just straight over the desktop normally. And from there, you go to a welcome screen. Now, I've already had several people purchase this and provide me with feedback. Alessandro, you may be pleased to see something I've written in the title bar there, that the forms are designed to be basically the size they need to be after automatic form resizing. But if you prefer, you can double click and maximize them. So from this form here, then it tells you some of the things I've said in the PowerPoint presentation. And also I've done a number of short videos that are available on YouTube or that you can watch from this app itself. And so, for example, if I click on this one here, the 6 of those videos at the moment, they're all available on YouTube, or you can look at them from my website. License info I'll come back to later on. Going from there, the main form is this one here. And you can see that I've already done another analysis, and I could load that and show you the details of that one there, or I can choose to go to a fresh new database and start the analysis from there. I might as well load that one to save some time. And in this particular one, I chose to have all of the different analysis options enabled. You always have to get a list of database objects. And that is shown in the first screen here, the object type, the object name. For forms, modules, and reports, it will tell you the default. Sorry, for forms and reports, it will tell you the default view, single, continuous, datasheet split, and similarly for reports, if I can find any. Yep, only one in this one, print preview in this case. For modules, it'll tell you whether it's a class or a standard module. For queries, it will tell you the type of query from all of the list there. And for tables, it will tell you whether it's system, local, linked. And if it's a linked one, it will tell you whether it's linked Excel, linked Access, SQL Server, and so on. This particular database hasn't got any linked tables. For those that know the ins and outs of the MSys object system table, the type and flag field are what is used by Access to give me that sort of information for tables, queries, and so on. The default view you get from the properties of each of those objects. You can tell where the objects are normally hidden in the navigation pane. And by the way, I'm looking at the ACCDB version, so I can see the navigation pane. In the version supplied, that is hidden because you're getting a compiled ACCDE file. Tells you whether they're system objects or not. And the include column is used if you decide that you want to get an estimate of the object sizes, then you can decide whether or not you want to include all objects or exclude all objects, or just include certain ones there and just look at those ones in some detail. And the way that it gets the object sizes is to export each object in turn to a new database. And that database that I measure the size of it before the object is exported and the size again after it's exported. And then it will then give you the size difference as the estimated, but fairly good estimate in most cases, of the object size in multiples of 4 kilobytes, one cluster size there. You get the total size of the database down below here. And this is one I should have come back to later, because you'll see here that the total size it's estimating is actually 2.355 megabytes, whereas the total file size is over 8 megabytes. So it could do with a bit of compacting. While I'm on this screen, you can save any of those objects to a text file. And it's opened on the other screen. I just drag that across. Do the same for forms, reports, tables, and in each case, then the text file folder is based on the name of the database. So I could do that with all of them in turn, or you can do it for all of those objects in one go, and existing text files in that folder will be overwritten. And it doesn't take long to do at all, as you can see. But if you decide you've made a mistake and don't want to do it now, just cancel it. That's basically it for this screen. I'll come back to that point about compacting later if I remember. There is a tree view type structure here, giving a summary of the main objects and the types and the default views and so on. I haven't taken that as far as I may do later. There's extra things I'm considering adding to that in a future update, if there's a demand for that. But of course, you can open a Zoom box if for any reason any of these things are too big to actually read. You can open a Zoom box to see those. Metadata, that's what you get in the navigation pane. If you go to the detailed view here, you get the date created, the date modified. Sometimes they're in the reverse order, find in the navigation pane. And if you've done a description, that's written there. And this information is shown on this screen here. And you can see on this particular one, I chose to do an awful lot of descriptions for objects there. But that is optional, whereas these two items are, of course, created every time. Let's go on to the next one, tables. For tables, you get the table type. I've already shown this on the previous screen here. Get some additional information as well. You got the number of fields, the number of records, and again, the object size if you've done that. All of these items are actually still in the host database. They're not actually, they've not been added to here. The data's been added, but not the actual objects here. I can open any of these tables in datasheet view, and what I'm actually doing is I'm linking to that table so I can open it. And similarly, I can look at the table design in the same way, but I'm linking to that, so therefore I'm not able to change that design in this database here. Standard access procedures there. And I really hope that they will allow us to get rid of this message that comes up every time you try to look at the design of a linked table. Maybe sometime in the future that will be done. Okay, relationships then. For relationship, there's not many in this particular database here. We've got then the information about the first table and the field from that table, and the second table and the field that it's joined to. What the relationship is, whether or not referential integrity has been applied. It hasn't in any of these cases, and where it has, whether cascade update or cascade delete has been applied as well. If you want a little bit more information, then you can get that from this screen here by clicking on that button on the left there, and it will tell you the name of the relationship, and also tell you something called the GR bit value, which is a value in the MSys relationships table that provides all of the information about the relationship type, the join and cascade information there. You can print that off, as you can with many of these other things, one of the many reports. I won't focus on that now. The relationship diagram, for this, it's one of two places where you are opening the external database. So you're warned about this at the beginning. And when I open this, then when I click on that, it will then, after a few seconds, open that in, as I say, the external database. And because it's in the external database, I can move items around there. I tried very hard to get that to work within the database itself, the analyzer, but I failed to do so. And I thought in the end, it's just not worth the effort I'm putting into this. So I put that to one side. Queries. For queries, similar sort of information then, the name of the query. You can look at the query in all the different views. I'll show you that in a second there. The query type. The last saved view information, which is either going to be design view or SQL view. And by default, if you open a query in design view, it will actually open in whatever was the last save view. So if the last save view was SQL, that's what it opens in. You've got the flags value, which determines the type of query, whether the query is hidden in the navigation pane or not. And obviously, these items are read-only. The number of fields, the number of records, any parameters. Don't seem to have any in here. Oh, yes, I have a couple of those there. I'll click on them in a second. And report errors, which in some cases will indicate the fact that the query won't run anywhere. For example, this one, ambiguous joins. If I click on that in design view, it opens in the external database. That's the second place this happens. And because I'm in the external database, then I can move this around here, and you can see the ambiguous join there. So that one then, let's click save for that and close that again. That one, if I click on datasheet view, you can't run it. So you've got an error there. Some others, you will get errors because the query, for example, in this case, oops, this query has got an undefined function. It would be defined in the host database, but it's not defined here. So I can't actually run that in the same way here. But I can look at the query in SQL view, and I can then copy that query, and then from the clipboard, I can then paste it into another app if I want to do so. I could look at any of these in design view, or I don't think oops, shouldn't have done that one there. I can look at them in datasheet view, and it's a data definition query there. I need to actually check what I'm clicking on before I click again. This one here has got parameters, so I'd need to put in what the parameter is, and I can't even remember what that is. Nothing there because I got the wrong values there, but you get the idea of this here. For the I want to come back to tables a second. I forgot to mention with the tables, you can also click on the fields column and get information about each of the fields in that table, and whether or not that's, expand that slightly, what the field, the data type is for that, whether or not it's a primary key field, whether it's been indexed, the size, in bytes or the length in characters for a short text field and so on, whether you've allowed zero length or whether it's a required field. And the same for all of the other tables. Let's come back here. I think I've covered everything in queries. Let's go on to procedures. So we've got here then a list of all of the forms, reports, and modules with anything that's got a code module behind it. So we've got the object type, the object name, and any procedures that are in there. And if I click on that, I get the code for that procedure, small amount of color coding here because I've got some keywords in there. And if we click on another one here, this one's got a couple of comments in it as well. And hyperlinks, if I can find one with a hyperlink, I can't see one here. Right. Oh, yes, that one may have a hyperlink. Yep. Then you get the color coding there and so on. You can also look at all of the code for a particular module, and in the same way, then you've got the color coding for each of these. You can print the code for either of the individual procedures or for an entire module, and you can also copy it to the clipboard if you want to do so as well. I'll just clear the clipboard. Object dependencies. As I say, this is one thing that you cannot even do in Access in quite the same way. For a small database, getting the dependencies doesn't take long, but for an Access or My Analyzer to get the object dependencies, it has to check every other form, report, table, and query against each other to see which depends on or is dependent on every other one there. So for a large database, it can take quite a lot of time. And Access gets around that by using the object dependencies tool. Just allows you to look at dependencies for one object at a time. Now with my start screen here, then I just give you the count for each one. And this one here has got 3 dependencies, 3 objects it depends on. And this one here has got 2 objects it depends on and 2 objects that depend on it. To look at the details for that, then I can look at here, and then I've got both of the objects, same sort of layout as you get on the object dependencies tool in the database tools ribbon. And that's just doing it for one object at a time here. And this particular one I clicked on there, I've got some broken or missing dependency objects. So that's an indication of something that needs to be checked out. And I found some in the Northwind database and let Tom and Stiffout know about those as well. Hopefully they'll deal with them for the next update. References. Standard list here then of all the references. In this case, it's just the normal standard 4. And if you click on any one of those, you get additional information about those. Similarly, this one here, etc. And if any of them are broken, that column would be ticked. And lastly, for now anyway, database properties. You've got a list of all of the properties, the property type, and the property value. And again, if any of these don't quite fit in the screen, this one does, you can do Shift and F2, and then a zoom window will open in the normal way. Now, when you've gone through all of this lot, you've probably covered most of the things you actually want. And somebody's already said to me, why didn't I make it an add-in? And the reason I chose not to, although I like add-ins, and not everybody here does, was that I wanted to be able to go from one sample database that I'm analyzing to another quickly, rather than have to actually open the database, do it within the database, close that, open another one, and so on. If I went to a client site and took my analyzer with me and looked at one of their databases on site, I might not have time to actually look at that later. So what I can do is I can save the analysis, and then next time I open the database, just like this one here, it will give me the option of reopening that and looking at it in my own time. And so therefore, obviously, I could put that on a memory stick or email it to myself and look at it later. But you can only save one database at a time by that method. If you want to save a database permanently, what you can do instead is make a backup. It will then save that to a folder, tells you the file name, and then that will be there for you at any time in the future. And it's a rather long, clunky name to tell you which folder it's in, what the database analyzer version was that made it, then the name of the database you're analyzing, and the year, month, date, time, minutes, hours, seconds, and so on there. So I've pretty much covered everything for that particular one, and I'll come back to the reports, I think, later on. But before I go on to something else, let me just mention that if I click on the Redo Analysis tool here, you can rerun an analysis, and usually why you do that is if you choose to change some of the options that are involved. So it's a good time really to look at this options screen here. We've got two sets of options. At the beginning, you saw a splash screen. You might not want to watch that repeatedly, so you can untick that. If you decide to pay for the full version, you can untick the welcome screen if you don't want to look at that each time. When you browse to find a new database, an information message will appear. I'm going to leave that on for now so you can see that happen once, and I will also show you what these ones do later on here as well. If I, for example, don't want to see code in color, if I've got a fairly underpowered machine that might be quite demanding on it, I could untick that one there. But I'll leave those for now. The analysis, the only item you have to do is to collect object information. And the way it does that, by the way, is it links to the MSys objects table in the external database, and from there it will store any password information and so on. I will show you that later. And the only other table from the external database that I link to is the relationships table. Everything else I'm analyzing from those two tables or from by other methods there. The number of options you include will obviously determine the extent of your analysis, and it will also determine the length of time it takes to run it. So if I deselect all those, it will be faster. Obviously, unless you have table information, you can't get information about the fields. You can do them separately there. But I'll deselect all that lot, and I'll rerun this one quickly now. Hopefully quickly. Collecting information about the objects. Takes a couple of seconds while it's loading that in the background there. And either nothing happened at all. Looks like nothing happened at all. God knows what happened there. Good start. Let's just add one object here. And this time I'll go to a different database. That's why. Right. So I've managed to tie it in knots there. Guarantee something will go wrong when you do this live. So I'm going to go back into it. And I've turned off the splash screen, and I've turned off the welcome screen, so it's gone straight to the main screen here. Let's just check we're still on. Next to no options, just metadata. Oh, and I'll include the object sizes as well. Right. Hopefully we'll get something this time. That's my warning message telling you that you're about to open a file dialog. So I've opened it, select a database. I've got a load that I've used a lot in testing this, put them all together here. It's loading it. It's not password protected in this case. So therefore it starts collecting. And I've only got two steps in here, object info and metadata, and it's done in 11 seconds. And you can see then the only analyses that are available are the ones that I've run here. It tells you when I did it, the time it took to do, and so on. I can still save objects as text and so on, but let's do a different one. Won't redo the analysis. We'll browse again. Oh, no, I'll change an option. I don't want to keep seeing that file dialog. I imagine that most users after a while will turn off many of those. So let's do one this time with a password. And I've got one here with a password, so I don't forget it. I put it in the name of the file, XYZ. Right, I'm sure you wouldn't do that normally. I hope you wouldn't do that normally. And it's not a very exciting database. Only a couple of steps. And again, only a couple of seconds to run that. You get the idea of this here. Let's show you a different one now, and that is one that is a runtime file. And the reason I want to do that is because runtime files, there are a couple of things that you cannot actually get because of the nature of that file. So we've got a blank DB there, which is a runtime file, or we've got this one here. And I'm going to cancel that because I meant to turn all the options back on again. So if we now select them all again, select that same database, this ACCDR file, and you see instead of 10 steps, it's only got 7 steps this time. 22 database objects, going through those. This one seems to be a bit slower at first. Properties, table info. I managed to jump one there. I didn't even see what it was. Then we'll get field info after this. Then queries. Oh, gone through them, no queries in this particular database. And lastly, database objects. Now, at the end of this, the options that I selected, all 10 of them, 3 of them didn't run. And because it's an ACCDR file, it's actually told you what that's happened there, right? Reference info isn't available. List of VBA procedures isn't available. Now, there's only 2 missing there. The reason is the third one, there's no queries in this particular one, I think. So we've got all of the objects here. Procedures is disabled because they weren't available. References are disabled for the same reason. Am I right? Yeah, there's no save queries. So there was only 7 different objects here. And similarly, if I went for an ACCDE file, that would also have a couple of items that are missing. You can't look at procedures. You can't see the default views of forms and reports and so on. Excuse me. I'm going to go for a totally different database. And this time I'm going to do one which has got a number of complex fields. Excuse me. And I probably should have turned off some of the options here, but I've left them all running. And what I wanted to show you in this one is some more detail about different data types in the fields here for the tables. And there's one more I want to show you, which has got a variety of different linked tables. And then we will look at the reports. If you've got a very, very large database with, say, 500 objects or more, the dependency information will likely take a long time, and you'll be warned about that if that is likely to be an issue, and you're given the option of turning that off before the analysis proceeds. But at this point here, this is nearly finished, I hope. I forgot to say that you can see the progress. You also get the estimated time, and it has decided to hang up on, there's a very, very large table which is in SQL Server for one of my school's databases, and that's why this one is taking a relatively long time. Just while that's finishing, Alessandro, are there any questions in the chat that are worth me following up at this stage?
Yeah. There's a question from Adrian about opening link tables and the possibility to turn this operation off, if I understand correctly.
No,
Adrian,
sorry, the design, do you mean, Adrian?
Just that, you know, the prompt, you were saying, oh, it's a pain that this prompt keeps coming out. I thought there was an option in Access that allows you to turn those off.
Not yet. It may happen in the near future. Unless it's appeared in a beta version, I'm not aware of it. It's basically something that has been requested and was received sympathetically, shall we say, by the Access team.
Yes, I sort of recall that discussion, if I'm honest, but
that was Anas Ebro said he was fed up with seeing it every time. He knows that's the issue, right? And as I said, I think it is being dealt with, but I was being deliberately vague about that. As far as I know, it's not yet available there. That took longer than I intended. Another one?
Colin, yeah, since we're here, there's Richard, or I don't know. He's asking if custom ribbons can be exposed as well.
I haven't done that yet. If you can send me that as an email or feedback, I'll look into doing that. That's a good idea, something I hadn't even thought of doing. Apologies. All right, so yeah, please will you follow that up via my website or via the online feedback form that I'll show you later. But this particular one, it's suggesting that the database may need compacting. Would I like to do this when the selected database is closed? I'm going to say yes to that. You can see why. the estimated file size is under 1.4 megabytes, but the actual file size is 3.2 megabytes there. So it's taking up more than twice the space it probably should do. With this then, look at these tables here. We've got link tables. It tells you the source of the data, in this case, SQL Server. I've deliberately put in a few other ones as well. I've got a DBase table here. Oops, sorry. When I click on that column, I've got 3 different columns overlapping, which is why if I click on it, they will disappear. So I won't do that again. If it's got a complex data type involved there, that's shown here. Excel 8.0, an old XLS file, a linked text file, linked SIMS file, staff link specification. That was one that took ages. Linked access. I've even got some obscure ones, style sheet, linked HTML. Probably you won't do those very often. And Outlook tables will take, or Outlook items will take quite a long time as well. So you can see a load of different types of table here. And if I try and find one which has got some complex data types here, we click on, and I'll need to go to the tables and go down here. Linked complex access, then clicking on this, you can see that it's got a multi-valued field there, not because I like them, but because I felt I had to test them for this particular thing here. This one here, 20 different fields there. DBase, they're all going to be fairly straightforward in DBase. This can link to any sort of database that Access can. It can read the type there. So we've looked at Azure SQL, we've looked at Dataverse even. I haven't got any of those in here. And then, as I said, you can actually look at the type of field as well, the type of complex field. So this particular one here has got a long text history field. There was one here, which is the one I've been looking for, which I can't seem to find, which has got a load of different sorts of data types and so on, but I will come back to that later. Let us look at some of these reports. The reports allow you to, rather than just looking at the one of these at a time, they allow you to look at all of those. So for the database properties, you get all of that on one screen there. For references, you get all of the references in detail on the screen, including any broken ones, the GUID, the source of it, and so on. This is the one that's perhaps more impressive, particularly if you've got a large database, then you've got all of the object dependencies in one screen there. I'll show you Northwind as a last one after I've done this. VBA procedures, oh, I didn't collect it. That wasn't very clever. Let's look at the full analysis. Now, with the full analysis, it does an extra step. And those of you who have downloaded the new Northwind templates would have seen this happen recently. About 20 years ago, there was an article on the Microsoft website that told you how to get a table of contents in a report. And it's something I did years ago, forgotten all about, and that page disappeared many years ago as well. Northwind inspired me to do the same thing here. So when you run this report, then it gives you a table of contents, after which then on each of those pages there, you will get each of those sub-reports. So each of the sub-reports right there are the same as the individual reports that I've got on the left-hand side of the main form here. Now, to do that, you'll notice, I'll just run it a second time here. To do that, it opens the file, scrolls through the pages, and in doing that, it collects the table of contents, collects the page of each sub-report on here. In the Northwind database, that was done for a single field, and that single field, what it did was it exported the exported the report as a PDF, which forces Access to run through each of the pages in turn. As it got to each of those objects, it then saved that to a table of contents table, which I can show you here. For me, it was slightly more complicated, and that was that what I wanted to know was where each sub-report occurred. And just to make life even more complicated, of course, each of these are optional items apart from the object info one there. And therefore, I had to find a way of expanding on the original idea. So what this does is, when I click on that button on the main form, it actually runs the report 3 times. The first time it runs it so that it actually makes sure that the display is as it's going to be finally, which is any objects that are excluded are omitted, any page breaks related to those are omitted. It then does it a second time, and it runs it to a PDF file, which gets the page numbers, saves it in that table I just showed you, and then it opens it in print preview. So here we go, one last time. Doesn't take too long at all, does it, to open that 3 times? If you're doing something like Northwind, it will take a little bit longer. So let's clear that. And I can't remember which options I've got involved here. So let's just click on here. I had all of them. Oh, yes, sorry, at this stage here, I forgot to show you there, but I could have, if I closed the database, I could have compacted it automatically. I'll leave that. I'm going to turn off those 2 messages there, which warn me that I'm going to open an external database. And I'll leave the coding color one turned on. So if we do the Northwind, and I'll do the starter one because it's a bit smaller and therefore won't take quite so long. Starter one will take about 2 minutes. The full developers version or edition takes about 3.5 minutes on my machine. And my machine is 12 years old and about as slow as I am. And therefore, most of you running this on your own machines will find it completes in about a third of the time it does on mine. But I just want to do this just to show you the Northwind report. And while we're doing that, any more questions, Alessandro, on the chat?
No, nothing. There was just a comment from Karl about the max number of 3D buttons on a form.
The max number of what, sorry?
3D buttons on a form. Karl, would you mind adding some details?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, I can.
I think it's just a bit crowded, your main form here. We never have this subject, you know, but too much text and too many buttons.
You're not saying I'm overdoing things as usual, are you, Karl?
No, never. But you could do it. It's hard to read if you have more than 30 3D buttons here, as in your option groups here. Then you have more than 60 lines and vertical lines, etc. And it's hard to read. So you should do a bit of redesigning, I think.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I'm not sure how you would redesign that. Thank you for that, Karl. That has actually reached in. Now, occasionally, there are no tables for this selection. Now, that's why here I turned off the local tables and the system tables. Turning that back on again here. And I've managed to mess up the way that works there. That was a waste of time doing the Northwind one because I now can't see here. Right, so let me just clear that and I will run it again. This time I'll run it for the Northwind 2 Dev Edition, but while it's doing that, I'm going to load my PowerPoint back up. So that'll take about 4 minutes in the background there. Hopefully it will run successfully. What's happening in the background on the Access database is that when it opens a database, it's opening it with the shift bypass enabled. So get past any startup screens. The Northwind Developers Edition and the Starter Edition has got 2 startup screens that require a response, and that will cause my analysis to freeze. And therefore, in order to actually avoid that problem, I use the shift bypass whenever I'm starting any database, and it re-enables it, or rather re-disables it if necessary for ones where that option has been disabled there. Now, because I've done the shift bypass, it means at the moment when I'm clicking on something, I'm actually getting all of the objects appearing together. I'm on the last database that I'm going to show you for today. I'll come back to that in a second. But amongst the items that are used in this application are extensive use of progress bars. You probably get fed up with watching them. Creating a table of contents and an access report. I've already mentioned that. The undocumented but widely known SaveAsText and LoadFromText features. Of course, automatic form resizing, and I showed you also media player control to play videos. That's an ActiveX control. I thought about using the Edge browser, but I decided not to do so in this particular version. If there's anything you want to know more about, particularly those items there or anything else, put it in the chat and we'll come back to that in a second. And just to say, though, while we're at this, that this is a commercial app. There are 2 simpler versions, one of which is free, but there is a discount off the full price until the end of September. If you click on that link, you can get to that. But please, before you do that, please try the free evaluation version and see whether you actually like it enough to actually make it worth doing the rest of it. And we're still not there, so therefore, let's go back to here.
While we wait, Colin, there's a question from Crystal, if you want.
Yes, please. Crystal.
She's asking if the target database timestamp gets changed by the analysis.
Yes, it has to, because it's opening it. It is opening it in the background. If I went to Task Manager at the moment, you would see both the current database and, in this case, Northwind. So therefore, yes, it must be changing the timestamp for the database.
You should reset it after the analysis.
No. It's a good point. This is an issue you run into. But if I did it the other way as an add-in, as somebody requested there, you'd have exactly the same issue. You'd be one with the other. You've got to open the database in order to do all of these things here. You could do some of it without opening it at all, but not all of it. And thank you for your very positive comments there. I'm going to come back to your analyzer later, Crystal, because Crystal also has her own free version of an analyzer, which is well worth looking at. So a couple of ways around this: flip to read only before open, or analyzer copy. If I flip it to read only before open, I suspect that I would have issues with certain things wouldn't be possible. Yes, I could have analyzed a copy. That's true. I must admit, it didn't really seem important enough to me to worry about the timestamp. But if other people think it is important, I can review that later there. Any other questions?
Well, making a copy might take even longer.
Well, yeah, for a large, I mean, I've got one particular database where the back end is 1.6 gigabytes, nearly all of which is in one table. And I've got a large front end schools database, which is 150 megabytes with about 5 gigabyte SQL Server backend. So copying them might be difficult and might be over time consuming. As I say, not something I really want to go down unless people think it's particularly important. Let me just see. Oh, we're on the last step there, so we might as well just finish this. So I'll just show you the size of the full report that you get for the Northwind 2 Developers Edition.
But Colin, you didn't try actually to set the read-only.
I can't honestly remember whether I tried it or not. But it's I will look into it, see what breaks basically. So
if you're only reading, I mean, it should work.
Yeah, right. Because I was doing other things at the same time, it took a bit longer than normal. My largest school database has got nearly 4,000 objects, and dependencies for that took about 3 hours to do. But that's an extreme. And as I said, sensibly, you would turn that off in normal cases where you're doing this. Right, full analysis. Remember, it's opening this report 3 times. First time, just checking which options are running. Second time, getting the page number information to go in the table there for table of contents, and there are 138 pages in this particular report, and you probably wouldn't want to print all that off, but you get the idea of that. I think I've just about finished on this. Let me just mention, I've mentioned the settings and options screen. You can look at the analysis history and get details of any analyses that you've completed, which options were included, when you did it, how long it took, whether or not you made a backup, permanent backup of the database, so you could look at that in future without actually having to overwrite another one. You can print that off, obviously, in the usual way here. There is a help file, which is a PDF file, which is basically the same information, almost anyway, as on my website. And there is also plug. Please, anyone who tries this out or buys it, please, would you fill in this feedback form? I've had lots of feedback in terms of emails, but so far, absolutely nobody has filled this in. It won't take very long. Most of it is just short response answers, but you can add more if you want to do so. But that would be really appreciated by me if you could do that. If anyone would like to ask any questions, now is your chance.
No question on the chat.
None at all.
Sorry to interrupt, Colin. Did we get an answer to Richard's question? I remember it being asked, but I thought just as Alessandro asked it, you then your thing started progressing and you went back to the demonstration. I didn't think it was a question about ribbon development.
No, I said it was a good idea. It won't at the moment because I've not even thought about doing it. And it's something I asked Richard to contact me to make sure I remember to include that in my list of possible additions to the tool.
Oh, I must have missed that. So you did get an answer. Fine. Excellent.
Yeah. Not the one Richard wanted at the moment, though, of course. But still.
Well,
that's all right.
That's the important thing.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I mean, I think the trouble with things like this is once you actually start, you can carry on adding more and more features and never finish them. And that was something I was determined to stop there, which is why I didn't do so. Any other questions before I go on to the next screen?
No, but that's a good try from Jeffrey saying,
I saw that.
You're ready.
I deliberately didn't answer it, but Jeffrey, now is your chance. Get your brain in gear. Right, quiz time. You can actually see all 5 questions. If I'd done the animation, you'd have seen them one at a time. First person to answer all the questions correctly gets a free license. But please, to make it simpler for Alessandra, who's going to monitor this, put them all in the same response. So I'll read them out. Which year was the first version of Access released? Secondly, which was the first Access version to include VBA? Third, which was the first to have a 64-bit option available? Fourth, what is the name of the query optimization technology used by Access? And lastly, which article on my website included all of those answers and I just had to filter from there? I'll leave them there for another few seconds.
Okay, so you don't want to give a free
Well, yeah, I did think afterwards, have I overdone this? All right. Hopefully someone will get all 5 of those, but if not, then maybe we'll consider getting quite close to it, but so far, nobody. The first 4 should be relatively easy. You've got one more question missing there, Adrian. I'm not even saying whether they're all right or not, but oh no, 2 questions missing.
I answered the 3 I had a stab at. I was able to have a stab.
Right. Okay. Leave that running for another few seconds. Has everybody noted down? If you can just note down any questions that you're thinking about. Jeffrey's come. Oh, don't think no ideas is an item on my website, but it's something I could look for. 30 seconds more, and I'll take this off the screen. Oh, we have a 5 answers from Xavier, but they're not all right, I'm afraid. Let's move on. Come back to that. Keeping the quiz running. Can I just point out that this isn't the only analyzer on the market? There are many others, and 2 of the most well-known, I think, are Crystal's one, which she did with a number of other people assisting in different parts of it, which is totally free, and it does many of the things I've done here. It does some things I haven't, doesn't do all the things I've got. And then the FMS site has got probably its flagship product, Total Access Analyzer, which again does many of the same things, but also has some features that I haven't got and vice versa. So both of those I recommend thoroughly, and I would recommend that you do look at those as well. But at this point here, Alessandro, do we have even anything like a winner or not?
No.
Oh,
somebody got the 1992. Jeffrey.
Don't
John
tell them all the answers now.
Okay. Well, 92 is popular. Only
Carl,
one.
hang on. Carl, you get your free license.
Carl.
It's not quite right. It is actually quite right. The actual URL. Well done, Carl. You win. Right. I'm not changing the buttons for you though. Well done, Carl. We'll sort that out later, and I'll get back to you. Juan, are you ready? He said he was here.
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Do you want to share your screen or not, Juan?
No, there's no need. I thought I had the camera working. It looks like it's not. Let me see.
Right. Well, if I stop sharing.
Oh, there you go. Hi,
there we go.
Everybody.
We can see you. Hiya. Welcome, Juan. For
right.
anyone who I'm sure everyone here does know, but Juan is the person to whom we're all responsible for setting up the AccessUserGroups.org back in 2014, I think.
Yes. Yes, it was quite.
Yeah, I thought you were asking a friend.
Thank you so much, Colin.
Yeah, right. Over to you. Anyway,
ask a friend. Well, thank you, Colin, for that wonderful presentation. Let's give a round of applause to Colin for this wonderful tool, this beautiful presentation, everybody. Applause, applause. Look, I wanted to say that I'll be presenting next month at Access Europe, and my topic would be In Microsoft Access, how do you reply back to when somebody says Microsoft Access is going away? If you're an Access MVP, you probably get that question quite often. I do that, get it a lot. We're going to be talking about that topic and how to defend yourself, right? When somebody does ask that, if you have a potential client or coworker that says Access is going away, how can you, what would be rhetorical question answers you can do that? And we're going to be talking about why people think Access is going away, and we're going to talk about why IT hates Access. We're going to talk about a lot about hate next month, but we're going to end up on a really good note. And I have quite the surprise for you guys in store towards the end of my session if you stick around for the end of that. So please join us next month. It's going to be on the Wednesday, right? Is it going to be on the second Wednesday of the month or the first Wednesday? I can't remember.
First Wednesday of the month, 4th of October.
First Wednesday of the month, same time, same channel.
Same channel, and we will still be on summertime, and I know you will be as well. So it'll be relatively the same. The November one is the tricky one where the US changes and we don't, or vice versa. I can't remember. Anyway, that's great. That you done? Is that it?
That's it for me. Thank you so much, Colin, for the opportunity.
Extremely concise. Well done, you. Thank you very much. I bet Karl wishes I could be as concise as you are here. So, right. So, thank you ever so much.
Karl, my competition.
Yeah, what you've got to do is outdo Karl's maximum views, which he got back in January when we managed to break Google, and it went up and down between 4,000 and 1,000 and 2,000 and so on. It seems to do it quite a lot here. So at this stage here, I'm going to come back to the question session. Is there anything else anyone wants to ask of me or Juan?
I'd like to ask, could we review the answers to your questions as Jeffrey Griffith, who has been involved in the Access team itself, would say that the first version that had VBA was actually version 2.
No, it wasn't. I checked.
Against what?
Access 2.
Oh, right. Okay. And Access 2 doesn't have...
No,
VBA.
Access 95 was the first one with VBA. And I remember that particular question because in DevCon back in, I think, April this year or previous year, that was one of the questions Philippe answered. And I said 97. I got it wrong then. Right. So it's definitely Access 95, sometimes called Access 7.0. And Karl is smiling. The winner.
With 2.0, we are talking about Access Basic, not about VBA. That's the difference. VBA came in later, the name.
I wanted it to be clarified. I wasn't trying to make a point one way or the other particularly, just simply that it had been raised and raised by someone who has good reason to know about such things.
They only called it VBA later on for the whole office.
That makes good sense.
If you remember, Access 95 was actually the first version that was integrated into the Office suite. So before that, it wouldn't have been Visual Basic for applications, even if it had been almost identical. But Access Basic, I have to admit, I can't say I used it much, so I don't know how good or bad it was. I did have Access 1.0 and had all sorts of issues with that, but that's another matter.
Well, I have to admit that as someone who's been doing Access for quite a long time, there was a big gap. I did some Access in Access 2 back in the day in the 90s. And then I get onto all sorts of other things. I only got back into Access again in 95. So I had sort of assumed that for a long while Access had been part of Office, but I didn't realize it had only come back in 95. Thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
As
I said, I've got a copy of every single version of Access back up to 2013, then a gap. I didn't bother buying 16, 19, 21 because I did 365. But I've got all the earlier ones, all on VMs. I use them every day, of course. Not.
Access Basic wasn't that different. They just broadened it with VBA. It was a kind of subset back then. And I did a lot of migrations from Access Basic 2.0 to 97, etc. So it wasn't that different.
bizarrely enough, my first entry into Access was Access 2. And it was mainly for the coding that I did it. So it was Access Basic at the time, but I didn't have any concept, of VBA at that point. Obviously, I just come in and found something I could work with, did a project, and then did nothing else on Access until, as I say, 95, 97. I think 97 came in just as I was,
I must have, although I had a copy of Access 1.0 at that stage, I was battling with Paradox for Windows, which I absolutely loathed. I found it almost impossible to work with, and opted out of Access for several years, went over to Excel and tried to use Excel as a database. It was only 97 when I really seriously started using it. So anyway.
Colin, I had some audio problems in the beginning. Maybe I missed that. But did you include the option to exclude linked tables from the analyzers? Yeah.
Yeah. There are, whether you do, if I've still got it open here, let's just come on to, no, I haven't got it open. If I just, I will open it and show you that in just a second there. Yes, the analyzer will collect the data at the beginning, whether or not you decide to show the linked tables or the system tables. Therefore, you can just click the checkbox and they will then appear. You can miss any of those out if you wish to do so. I've closed the database. No, I haven't. It's here. Right. Am I sharing my screen? I'm not, am I?
By the way, I think it's okay now to share the video, isn't it, in this discussion session part here?
Yeah. So basically with this then, scrolling down here, if we choose, even if we choose to exclude all of the table types here, right, then the data is still collected. And therefore, once you've actually tick any of these, you will get those items appearing in here. Local tables, system tables, etc. You must obviously have at least one object that's visible for this to actually do anything at all, though.
so it doesn't, that's just basically says what it's going to show. It doesn't affect what it's going to.
No. Again, it's a decision I made that it's actually going to be quicker to collect all the information at the beginning rather than actually getting through here. You think, oh, I wish I'd got the linked tables as well, and then having to run the analysis separately for that. So it's just basically the information is there. It's all stored in various different tables down here.
It might be a good idea to make it clearer then, based on the idea that maybe people would see that and think, oh, well, I'm running short of time. I don't want to spend the time to do that. If they realize they're not going to save any time, they might make a different choice.
Yeah, I think that's written in one of the help articles, more information about that. Right, at this point then, there are no more questions. Who names the names of each of these people in the images? Oh, yeah. Right.
I only knew they were previous Access employees. I didn't know.
Yeah, the Nancy Davolio who changed appearance she had a very, very efficient plastic surgeon to change her face quite so much and to get younger as the years went on.
Oh, right.
If you see, that's the oldest one back in 1992. And well, you can sort of look at the chin and think, well, maybe, but I don't really think so.
That was 90s fashion, though, Colin. Bear in mind, or 80s fashion, hung over.
Power shoulders, I know, but not power chin necessarily.
And the hair.
Yeah, there is that. Right. Let me just, I don't know why I'm doing it this way here. Let me just click on here and just say that this web page, then lots and lots of screenshots. And to save scrolling again, if I just go to downloads, you've got 4 different evaluation versions, all free for 32-bit or 64-bit, Access 2010 or later, and specifically for Access 365, which will allow you to see data types not visible in 2010. And the only limitation of it is it is deliberately restricted to one file that is supplied with the sample analyzer. And if you try and change that file or replace that file, even renaming it the same thing or add items to it, it won't run. So you can't get around it that way. That's all for today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next month.